or maybe you start out with sketches or you're a cinematographer, but I get lost in it. I'm like, and when I'm drawing, sometimes like I'm just having a conversation with it and I'm following it, and like I don't know where it'll go, and it becomes something more than just like a storyboard, right?
Welcome to the Flying Fruit Bowl, a platform dedicated to the exploration and discussion of art and the creative process. I'm the host and creator, Aaron S. In today's episode, I had the chance to talk to the amazing Jacqueline Sarah Brown. Jacqueline is an artist and illustrator based in the San Francisco Bay Area who creates a mixture of personal and commercial work. She had worked for clients such as Field US, Just Transition Alliance, and Kirk Bear Library. Recently, she produced a commissioned mural for 826 Valencia, and during the coronavirus lockdown, she created a series of murals spanning 816 square feet for a Google building in Mountain View. I had an amazing time talking to Jacqueline about her work, and this is the first part of a two-part interview. Okay, so the first place I start with everybody, as you will definitely well know, is tell us a bit about yourself and how you became an illustrator. And actually, do you prefer the term illustrator or artist, or do you not mind?
Okay. Well, thanks, first of all, for inviting me to your show. I really appreciate that. And so my name is Jacqueline Brown, and I would say that I'm an illustrator and an artist. And I've been an illustrator for the past 5 years, and this is actually my second career. Okay. My first career was as a web developer and a digital interactive artist. So I guess that my story begins in college. I thought that I was going to major in information technology. I had seen the movie Hackers when I was in high school, and I thought that programming was super cool. And there was something magical about the future and using technology to create that. But at the same time, I had been creating art since I was young. When I was 13, I had taken oil painting classes that were more like Bob Ross style painting, like paint by instruction sort of thing. So it wasn't too creative, but when I was in college, I studied drawing, painting, and sculpture. And I also used technology to create art. I was using Flash back then, which is something that you may be familiar with, that's used to create animations and interactive websites. And so, so back then that was cutting edge. And I took a year off from college, and then I went to grad school because I wanted to keep learning how to use programming to create artwork. And I think it was around that time that I started to experience this sort of heartbreak from not drawing and painting as much, because using technology to make work was pulling me away from that. And so after I graduated, I was in a huge amount of debt, and spent the next 10 years as a programmer doing web development. But finally, I found myself at a startup in San Francisco called Brilliant.org, and it's a website. They make math and physics problems for students. It's kind of like a Facebook for nerds that's very specifically focused on that. And I had an opportunity to make illustrations for those problems, and it was like a turning point for me, I guess, because I thought, oh wow, like I can get paid and make these illustrations too. It felt like something that I couldn't turn back from. So after that, then that was the turning point for me to think about how to make a career out of making illustrations, and here I am today.
That's really amazing though. It's interesting how you had like one career and you thought you were going to go in one direction, and then suddenly you actually like, no, actually there's an overlap between what you'd like to do and actually what could have potentially become a second career. And actually I'm super curious just to know, like, at what point did you decide, okay, you know what, actually this is what I'm going to do?
I think that a couple of things happened. After I had left that startup that I did illustrations at, I was still doing freelance work, sometimes doing user interaction, that UI design, that sort of thing. But around that time, my dad had passed away. And also, not too long before then, I think maybe it was a year before, an old boss had passed away, and they're both in their 50s. And like it really made me think about how short life is,
Yeah.
and what I want to spend my time doing. And I had also always had this vision that, like, when I'm 80, I wanted to be painting in an apple orchard.
That's great.
It was just this vision that I had. I don't know. I didn't know how I would get there, but I thought, well, let me try to figure out what I'll do from now until then.
That's amazing, and I think that's such a it's a term. It's great to have a goal. I think that's one thing I struggle with, actually, very much so. It's like not having a specific goal or something that I really want to do. I think that's really amazing that you've actually have, like, actually, even if it's like a super loose goal and it's not so defined, I think that's a really good idea, because then it feels like you're doing something towards that, as opposed to just like floating around in life and not really knowing what you're doing. I think that's actually really cool. I think that's really great, and I think, yeah, I think that's a great goal to have, though. Why an apple orchard, though?
I don't really know. I do like apples. It wouldn't be something if I had like a fear of apples. I guess I wouldn't have thought that.
So, did you formally study art?
I did. So I studied studio art in college, but I did have that 10-year career in programming. And during that time, I was still drawing, but my skills had atrophied
Okay.
to the point where I felt like I needed to, when I had this desire to get back into art, I had to ramp up my skills. And so I took different online classes from different websites. One of them, CGMA, and that website's more focused on people who were getting into the animation or film industry. But they offer really great courses in drawing online. And some other websites that I've found classes on are Skillshare and Domestika. And yeah, so it's a mixture of both.
See, I think that's really fascinating, though, because that's, you did that yourself. You took the initiative to go out and learn these things yourself, as opposed to being like, oh, you must do this, or like, oh, I have to do this, and I think that's very commendable, because you could have just been like, what, actually, I like doing this, and I could just keep drawing the way I am, but no, it's fine. But you were like, no, actually, I want to improve my skills. I want to actually learn. And so what are your thoughts about art education, and kind of the way art is taught? Do you think it's a good or bad thing?
I think that going to a brick and mortar school is a good thing, because you connect with the community, and it's really important to have that connection with people. I think it's hard to achieve that if you are just doing it online, or if you're learning on your own. But if you go to school, that's provided for you. Like,
Yeah.
there's, 30, 60 students there that all have the same goal. And when you share the same goal with someone else, there's an energy that is palpable. And there are opportunities that you get if you're in a school that just don't exist for people who aren't enrolled in a program. A lot of companies, they'll take in people who want to do an internship there only if they can prove that, like, they are like enrolled in the school, yeah, or haven't graduated yet. I think that only exists for people who are students. And having a degree too is validation for other people. People really like to see those credentials. So, it means something. Even if that's not what you end up doing, it still shows that you're professional enough to follow through with it and to go through that course. But I would say that in an ideal situation, I think it's probably good to start learning early. Like Michelangelo, he started when he was 12. Even though his parents actually, they didn't approve of it, and they thought art was low status. But he got an apprenticeship, and it went a long way.
And actually, that's a question I was going to ask you much later, but I'll ask you now, actually, and then we'll come back to continuing these questions. But what actually are your thoughts then on the kind of status of art nowadays in contemporary society? Do you think that it's still classed in some way, quote unquote, as low value, And or do you think that people still value art and the time it takes to create something?
I think that education right now is very expensive, and I think it's very difficult to make it as an artist. I don't know if it's easier to be an artist. If I mean, you're in Europe, I know that some of my friends had a much cheaper education, but in America, the tuition is absurd, and so it's very hard. I think if you go through a school to end up with like after I went to grad school, I ended up with $80,000 in debt. Well, I'm
Yeah.
sure that that's a lot higher now, um, and and you know that is part of the reason why I had a career as a programmer. It was part of it because it was very hard for me to just kind of to do what I really wanted to do because I needed to pay it
Yeah,
off.
of course.
I
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely. You need money. And sometimes art doesn't provide that. Actually, a lot of the time, art probably doesn't provide that. Because you have really, really, really great, amazing artists who are still, you know, like art's not a career you can just have. It's a lifetime career that you have to build. And I think a lot of the time people don't seem to fully realize that, or at least until they're trying to do that career, they don't realize that. Like, you know, like I do photography and it's fun, but I definitely would need a part-time job and or a full-time job to support it because you don't get paid enough. And like there's nothing wrong with that for now, but there has to be a limit to as where you kind of weigh if things are really worth it. And I think with art, you see a lot of success online, and a lot of kind of like highlight reels of people's lives and being really successful and having great gallery shows and you know having a lot of patrons, for instance. And it can seem like, oh, actually, this is quite profitable. You just make an image, you put it online, you get a lot of likes, it equates to money, but it's not always the case. And I think what you said is actually a really good point. Um, and we'll get back into that later. That'll be something to discuss later when we get to the social media section. Um, yeah, we'll talk about that later because I'll go off on a tangent about it now. Otherwise, um,
well, I do have one more thing to say though about the value of art. I think that as long as people are willing to pay money for it, that shows that it has a great value, right? And people, you know, it really depends. People are making a lot of money from art, right? And that's not just with the likes. I mean, that's with like real auctions or nifties, non-fungible tokens. People are selling digital art online, and you know, I guess it helps to have had an audience for a while to get to that point, but still. Um,
no, I completely agree. That's a good point. I don't want to sound negative, like you can't make a career out because you can, but I think what I really want to make people aware of, if they're not already aware, is that it's not a career you're going to have overnight, as much as it might seem like you might. I think that's really what I would like to stress personally. But that's just me. I mean, what do I know? I'm just a random guy from England. What do I know? Um, okay, so getting back into the questions. So, what is the most challenging part about being an illustrator?
I think the most challenging part is the problem solving aspect of it. Because if you were in a different profession, like you're a scientist or you're a mathematician, you have a problem, you're an engineer, there's a clear answer. And once you solve that, then it's done. Then you're good to go, even if it's a difficult problem. But with making illustrations, it's not that clear cut that you've solved the visual problem that communicates the answer that, or communicates whatever needs to be communicated in the best way, and finding that the best visual solution is very subjective. It can be subjective, but sometimes it resonates, and that's not clear cut.
And there's so many possibilities as well. There's there's just so many answers. It's like, and you have to find a way to figure out the best suitable one that's going to please both you and the client, because it's not just about you; it's also about somebody else. But it's not just about them; also, it's also about you. It's like the compromise. Yeah, yeah. Actually, which is actually quite interesting. That idea of compromise.
Well, you know, sometimes you can have a great idea, and someone else thinks that that an idea that's not as good is what they want to go with, and so that's complicated too because, well, there were two possibilities, but it is so subjective that sometimes maybe some people love dogs or something, so they want to have like something that this is just an off-cut example, but like maybe they want to have a dog in the picture for no reason, right? Like something silly like that, right? And it would detract from it. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like you have to kind of figure out a way that's going to make sense, but then also just, please the client because they're not paying you to do it. But actually, it's kind of interesting, the idea of negotiation and kind of like, I guess the compromise you have of being an artist, because it's not, because, the thing about being an artist is that you're very free. There's a lot of freedom of being an artist, which I don't know if that was a question I added into the notes, but I'm pretty sure it might have been. I'm not too sure. But there's like a lot of freedom of being an artist, and you kind of, you can choose your own briefs and that kind of stuff, as far as I know. But actually, when you come down to it, it's actually, a lot of it's actually not based on what you think and what you feel. You're just there to create the work. And actually, have you ever done an idea? Have you ever came up with an idea that you presented to a client and they didn't quite like it, and then you just did it yourself on the side as your own project?
Well, what will happen is when there's been a time when I made illustrations for a startup. It was a startup called Phil. I think they changed their .us, Phil.us. It was a prescription startup, and I created illustrations for their user flow for the onboarding screens and some of the screens within the app. And later I updated them because I wanted to make it better for my portfolio, because I have clients that are looking at my work and I want to be able to sell that. And that won't necessarily make it, even though they appreciated it, I don't think that it made it into the app. And, I think that's fine. I think if you want to keep working on something, you can polish it, and, like people kind of get stuck with the first idea, right? Or the first iteration.
Absolutely. And I think, also if you've been thinking about it for a long time as well, or it's like just think you're not too sure what you want to do, and it's like, actually, I've got this idea, let's just go with this idea because this is the one that's in my mind at this moment in time. But I think also it must be hard though, because it's like different days can affect your opinions and moods. So it's like one day you could be like, this is the best idea. The next day there you can be like, this is terrible. Like you can just be like halfway through a project and be like, what the hell am I doing? So I imagine it's actually quite challenging, I imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I really enjoy collaborating with other people. I love to find out like how people are looking at something, because it's always from a perspective that I'm not, familiar with. And the closer that I can get to where they're coming from, the better the end product will be. And I learn a lot from it. I love, just learning about different kinds of things that people are working on in the services industry, or like I've learned a lot about this, and this is not just for illustration work, but this is from my programming career. I've also, worked with clients who are like, I can't really name the names, but I work with clients that are in like the retirement industry. And so I've learned about, like how to save money for retirement or things like that. Just, things that might seem boring that I would never learn myself. Well, when you work with clients who are engaged in that and you try to create something that will leverage what they already have, then you grow as an individual.
But that's really cool though, because you get to learn new things that, as you said, you never would have learned by yourself, and that's kind of such a good benefit, and it's kind of like why talking to everybody and talking to random people are so good, because you learn so many random cool different things that you would never have thought about. So I think that's a great idea. I think that's awesome. I think if you're gaining something more than just the pay, that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, for sure.
It's really cool. Well, I think that's great. I think that's awesome, and it's great that you're receptive of that as well, as opposed to being just like, okay, no, I don't really care. I don't care, just give me the money. You're just like, no, actually, this is interesting. And actually, it's going to help you in the future as well, which is cool. And hey, and you never know who you're going to meet further down the line where that knowledge is going to be useful to them, or it's going to help you build a bond with them. So that's actually really fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that being able to understand and listen to someone else is very hard to do, right? And when you can do that, then you end up with something that's different than what you would do yourself. And so that's, you can evolve that way. Your work can evolve that way by taking different inputs.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. So, the last year and a half, we've obviously all been affected by COVID-19, and just the way it's affected not just the arts, but every industry across the world. But how has it affected you in your practice?
So for the first year for 2020, during the lockdown, I couldn't go outside here, and I was working on the Google project. So I worked on a series of indoor murals for a new Google office in Mountain View, and they we had to work remotely because I couldn't go with them and meet with them. And normally in the beginning process, during the sketching phase, I like to go out. The client had requested that that landmarks were within the murals themselves. So I normally would have gone to walk around San Francisco and sketched and looked at things from different perspectives, but I had to rely on images from Google in order to create those preparatory drawings, which is not ideal.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that I felt that was a limitation. Later on in that project, when I did the actual painting, I still wasn't vaccinated, and they were gutting the interior, and they had a construction crew that was completely redoing the interior. So when I arrived, I found out that the week before they had taken a week off because they found out that someone had COVID on the site. So that kind of freaked me out.
Yeah,
and the foreman, he said that he knew he had an old classmate who had died from COVID, so it was like, a little bit frightening at that time. And I would have liked to have gotten an assistant to work with me, but we were maintaining social distance, and so I painted it without any help, and I really wish that I could have had help.
Wait, so you did it all by yourself?
Yeah,
that is insane.
It nearly killed me.
Yeah, that's insane because I'm looking here because I copied the little bio of it onto here so I can talk about it a bit deeper. It's 1,816 square feet, and you're painting that by yourself. How long did that take?
It took me a month to do, and a month, and also it was very difficult because I had to wear a mask the whole time, and you're not allowed. We're not to drink or eat indoors, so I had to go out into the parking lot to do that. But then it was complicated because the whole setup and getting temperature checked every morning.
That's not ideal situations to be working in. That's pretty crazy, actually, to be honest. But although a huge, commandments to you because you actually did it. You actually did it, and you did a damn good job as well. But you did it, and I think that's really cool, actually, to hear that. Yes, okay, there was a crazy amount of limitations, and too much. You could have just gave up and been like, look, we can just do this in a year when things are back to normal. But you didn't. You were like, you know what, actually, I've got this opportunity, might as well do it. And actually, how did the opportunity come about?
I had worked on I worked with the architect who redesigned the space, and I had worked with him on the previous mural for 826 Valencia. So we had a good he was really happy with my work ethic on that project, and we stayed in touch. And so he was like really impressed with what I'd done there, so he reached out to me again. And
So I want to get back. I want to get into the other mural as well, but before I do, so I'm trying to think of how I'm going to phrase it because it's not a question I was going to ask you. The kind of idea of collaboration, okay, that's it. So how important is collaboration to you in your process then?
Well, it was really important in this project because if I just went to the site, let's just say if I went to the Google site and I just painted whatever I wanted, there's no telling whether they would like it or not. I guess there are people that do that, but that's a lot of work, and not the best way to approach a large scale project. I mean, yeah, like I really enjoy collaborating with them because the architect had a vision in mind for the entire space, and I wanted the work to be a mirror of that. So for that site, they had a theme of it being within a comics space. So like if you walk around the building, there are different rooms that have like openings, doorways that aren't like rectilinear, like they're kind of like or they resemble like the frames of a comic book or
That's so cool.
yeah. So I really wanted to try to make sure that we're on the same page and that you experience the site as a whole, not just like an image that's there.
So do you think that the images online on your website do the space justice?
It's really hard to photograph work that's in a space that's a mural. For the other mural that I did at 826 Valencia, that one was really hard to photograph because I put a varnish on it and it's got a glossy varnish and it was like reflecting. Like it's really hard to photograph. And it's also quite large. That one was 45 feet wide by 15 feet tall. And there are pillars within the space that hold up the structure. So you can't actually take a photo of it in its entirety. I mean, you'd have to walk out across the outside into the street. But even then, like the windows would block the view. So yeah. So I think it's hard to really convey it online.
But that's interesting though, because then it becomes a personal experience as opposed to just something that you can just see online. And I think that's actually really an interesting idea for art. Yeah, because I think, and actually now I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about all the other people I've ever spoken to about murals and the people I will speak to about murals. That's something to talk to them about, actually, the idea of the experience of art. Because so like, what do you want people to feel? Like, what would you hope that people would get out of going to, say, the Google office and seeing that mural?
Mm-hmm. For Google, I took into consideration the fact that they have always had this kind of fun aesthetic. In the early offices of Google, I think had bouncy balls like of different primary colors, or like bean bags or ping pong tables. They want to encourage a sense of fun and play in their workspace, and so that's what I was trying to communicate with the work. And I wasn't trying to make it too serious because I knew that I think seeing something that's kind of ridiculous and silly and even childlike, I think it's a good thing to contrast the seriousness of the work.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think as adults, we always lose that childlike wonder of the world. And I think that's, well, we don't always lose it, but it's kind of quite often lost or quite often pushed down. Maybe that's not the best way to put it, but I push down. You're not really permitted to be childish when you're older. You're not really permitted to kind of have a natural curiosity about the world and do things that seem absurd to other people. But as a child, it's all about play. But unless you're in a creative practice in your day-to-day 9-to-5 job, there's no room for that because it's just about money and commerce. And I think that's kind of, I guess, one of the beauties of art, really, is that you get to play, you get to be creative, you get to kind of imagine things and try things out. And if you fail, it doesn't really matter. You can try something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that's what businesses need to do. I think to adapt and survive is to experiment. And it seems like the ones that don't do well are the ones that are kind of like stuck in a certain vision and don't have any room for that kind of play.
Yeah, I think it's I have a full-time job, and that does not happen in just general 9-to-5 jobs, and I think that is kind of a shame because I think we all kind of need, whether no matter how old you are, you need some kind of curiosity, I think, about just the world and about the things you're doing and just ways to engage with even like a regular, let's say we have a regular 9-to-5 office job. You want to be engaged with what you're doing. You don't want to just go there and be like, oh, this is just a paycheck and ends to a means. You want to be like, okay, to be excited to be there and kind of just be like, oh, I want to be here. I think you're right. I think businesses should really kind of strive to consider how they're going to get that from their employees in a more fun approach. That's not just, oh, here's some pizza we brought for you because you've been doing a good job. It's like, well, what about making the job itself fun? I'd probably just cook up pieces today at work, but who knows? So working for clients, I'm super curious. I'm always curious, but I'm super curious about this idea of working for clients. So like, what do you look for in a client?
I think that it's really the kind of work that I'm looking for within a client. I mean, well, a client has to be open-minded and like have a sense of openness to what the work will be. But I think that I'm more concerned about whether the project that I'm going to do is going to be public facing or not. If it's just work that's like B2B or it's internal communications or if it's under NDA and I can't show it on my website, well then it's really hard for me to market myself to other client works as an illustrator. So having visibility is super important.
That's actually a really good point. I didn't actually think about that in terms of the different kind of types of client, and I particularly the idea of if it's not public facing, if it's more of a private kind of commission. That's actually not something I thought about. Actually, that's really interesting though. But that makes sense because you don't want to market your work off the work you're creating because that's how you want to get more work. Just the natural way it is. I think that's actually a really good point. I didn't think about that at all. I have not even thought about that. That's really fascinating. But have you ever had any clients come to you with project ideas and you're just like, no, this is not what I want to do? Or like how do you go about kind of figuring out what is going to be worth your time and what's not going to be worth your time?
I'm not going to name any names, but
of course not, no.
I have been reached out to by someone who I knew only did work that would be NDA, and I'm not as assertive with that as I would with other projects, and so I mean, I just let it sit on the back burner. Maybe I'll do it, but I mean, I probably won't.
I mean, I guess no, but I guess that if a client comes to you with an NDA project or a project that's more private, I guess the only way you'd benefit is by raising the amount you'll charge. Because at the end of the day, if you're not getting visibility from it as well as a paycheck, you at least might as well get a paycheck from it because your time is still money. You could have spent that time on another project that's going to be better for your portfolio, say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that you can always approach such things as opportunities to do something different, like maybe learn a different program, right? And or a different medium. I mean, there are ways to spin it, like if you find yourself in that situation.
Yeah, it'd be like a different subject matter. Maybe like somebody wants you to paint, I don't know, like furniture. I don't know. I was looking at my wardrobe, like what can I think about? I mean, that's a great way to experiment, I guess. But then again, I guess you could always, then to be honest, I guess rather than do it for a client, you could always just with the enough money in mind, carve out some time to do personal projects for yourself and do the same thing. So it really has to be worth your time, because if you're creating work for clients and not just for yourself, like you need that time. And it's like obviously clients are going to be aware that you are working for other people also. So it's like. But so that's something didn't actually write down, but now I'm thinking about it. So how do you balance different kind of like client work? Like, do you do more than one project at once, or do you just focus on one?
I tend to for client work, I focus on one, but I do a lot of sketches in my sketchbook, so yes. I'm always kind of like thinking about both. But well, when it came to the Google project, I really couldn't do anything else because I had to be on site every day, and some things are more demanding than others.
Absolutely. And actually, I put here actually commercial versus personal work. So that's really interesting because you don't just do client work; you also do personal work. You have a sketchbook, you have images and art you create, you have other ideas outside of just what you've been asked to do. And I'm kind of curious as to how do you define the two?
Well, I think that with commercial work, there's something that you deliver, and the process of working with someone else, it becomes a collaboration and something that you wouldn't create if you were just working on it by yourself. For personal work, I know that I don't have a target date when I have by which I
Yeah.
have to finish it by. So there, so I can spend as little or as much time as I want to on it. Um, and I don't have to think about like at the when I'm working on it where it's going to be, at least like for that time being.
So let's talk a bit about your personal work actually. So what kind of like themes and concepts do you like to explore? And what kind of imagery are you drawn to?
I used to be drawn to architecture and different kinds of spaces, but lately I've been drawn to more figurative work, and also I'm drawn towards animals that are anthropomorphized, that like have a more surreal kind of tone. Yeah, and things that don't really make sense.
That's like the fun of it though. That's I think that's the one powerful thing about art is that unlike most of the other kind of arts like film, like photography, like literature, like with art, you're not bound by any kind of structure of reality. You have, if you want to create, a three-headed chicken, that's so random. But if you want to create like a three-headed chicken, that's perfectly plausible. You can do that. If you want to create like a cyclops snake, why am I picking animals? Like a cyclops snake, that's perfectly fine. You can do that. If you want to create somebody with, 5 hands, you can do that, and that's perfectly fine. There's no limitations. Whereas in everything else, there is always some form of limitation. And actually, how have you found that in terms of, is that partly the reason why you think you enjoy art?
I yeah, I mean, I think there's that fun element, right? Like something that I'm working on right now. Within the scene, there um there's a problem, right? There's like there's a telescope and there's a bird looking for it, but like how's the bird manipulating the telescope? And like I just like created a hand like that bird has, because because like it would just it would work better for it. So yeah, I think that like being able to make something out is a large part of the fun.
And how do you generate ideas and concepts? Because you're not really bound by any particular kind of one subject matter or one theme or one even kind of style.
um I will think of things that I think are interesting. I've been spending a lot of time focusing on making on the concept, and I use that to try to make it sure that the foundation works. So like I'm interested in like space and time,
Yeah.
or maybe I'll like watch some show about physics, right? And that's like the starting point for me. Just thinking about images. When I start drawing, I don't necessarily know what I'm going to draw when I'm sketching
Okay.
out ideas. But if I have an idea or a general concept in mind, that helps to drive it
Okay,
forward.
that's cool. 'Cause I was going to say, so like, how do you know when an idea will make a good image? Or is the whole point that you don't know?
Hmm. Well, you can't really predict when the image will work out, and there's so many different factors for that. But the most important thing is how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
And I always try to strive for like get the mood right, because you can have an image of anything, of a landscape that's relatively normal scene, but if you have a mood behind it, it makes all the difference.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. As somebody who looks at a lot of art, I can definitely agree with that. I think reminds me of an artist, an artist I recently saw whose work I really love because it's so moody and I like that. And just I love like night photography because it's moody. Yeah, the mood and atmosphere can really change the perspective of an image, or even whether that's the most simplest, plainest image, adding a bit of mist and a bit of fog, um, it changes everything. I think that's a really good consideration actually. And I think that's a great thing about your work is that, and actually what I love seeing, why I really seeing, why I really enjoyed it when I discovered it is that it's so eclectic. It's not tied down to, oh, the lady only paints birds or she only paints, trees. It's, there's so many different elements, and I'm surprised. It's a constant surprise. I don't know what I'm going to see next from you. And is that something you intended? The idea of surprise?
I think that I'm not a very predictable person. I think that people that I used to work with when I was a programmer didn't predict that it's like I'm a whole different person now. They don't even know who I am. But people who knew me from before when I was an artist, they understand that, and they didn't understand the programming part of it.
Ah,
Um,
that's quite nice though.
so yeah, I guess that the work does kind of reflect that kind of desire for something that's not what I would usually do. I always like to change it up.
So why do you think that you chose art as your medium? And obviously illustration within that, but like art as your medium. Like why not like say photography or say fashion or literature?
I just really enjoy the craft of it. I love drawing and painting and making images. It just I just think it's like I love the way that you can make it surreal, but I think that it just has so much potential that's easy for me to access than it would in some other medium. And I just love the tools itself. I love the way that, well, when it comes to drawing, I know that you can make sketches for different mediums, right? Like if you're a filmmaker, maybe you start out with sketches, or you're a cinematographer. But I get lost in it. And when I'm drawing, sometimes like I'm just having a conversation with it and I'm following it, and like I don't know where it'll go, and it becomes something more than just like a storyboard, right?
Actually, actually, wait, that's a really interesting consideration. I feel like I said that a lot. That's a really interesting consideration. This idea that like you create a piece of work that you don't quite know what's going to be, and then you create it, and then you draw it, and you look at it, and it kind of becomes its own. It has like a life of its own, and it kind of informs you as much as you inform it. It's like a two-way conversation, almost with yourself, I guess, like your subconscious and you. I think that's probably a nice way to look at it, because there's a reason you chose to do a bird with a hand. Like there's a reason you choose to do certain things. You just don't know what the reasons are. And for me, I found that creativity and art is a great, catharsis. It's a great way to kind of really connect with yourself on a deeper level, and kind of like maybe the feelings and thoughts and considerations that you're suppressing, or that you didn't realize you had, or maybe that you want to release. So I think that's really interesting. And I think because your work is so kind of eclectic is the best. I was going to say random, but eclectic is a better way, because random means like sounds like you're just doing whatever, and it's not. There is a purpose behind your work. You probably don't quite know what it is, but there is a purpose there. So I like this kind of, I like it. I like the surprise of it, and I like the fact that it's just like what it challenges the viewer to question what they're looking at, because they're not sure. And I think that's amazing. I think that's really cool. That's what fascinates me. And especially when it comes to, say, for instance, just going back to the mural you painted, the Valencia mural. Valencia, was it Valencia?
Valencia.
Yeah, Valencia Mission Bay mural. Don't want to get that wrong. The Valencia Mission Bay mural, it's like, I spent a long time looking at that, because there was so many details, and it was so interesting, and there's so much to look at. And yes, okay, I imagine that had I walked through it, the experience would have been better. But I think I can still appreciate the fact that you're very meticulous in your approach to detail, and you have a very good vision. So I think that's what probably initially drew me to your work. I would say, but that might be wrong. But I would say.
Oh, thank you.
No, it's no problem, honestly. But I don't know. I can appreciate the fact that your work is very different, and I feel like I say this to everybody, and I feel bad. It probably sounds like I just say this to say this, but like as somebody who looks at a lot of art, like you can imagine, I look at a lot of art every day, and I talk to a lot of artists. But it's like there are definitely certain people whose work strikes me in a different way, because landscapes are nice, portraits are nice. I was going to say figurative work is kind of the same thing. You see work sometimes that's a bit repetitive, or you see kind of similar themes and trends. But someone like you is like, because you've got, I think it's because you have kind of, there's a very interesting duality to your work. The idea of you work, kind of, particularly because you work both in digital and analog. And I think that's also very intriguing. You do create both in digital and analog. And kind of, what does each of those do that the other one doesn't?
Well, digital work So sometimes I think it's hard to tell if something is made digitally or if it's made traditionally, because nowadays, if you use different software, you can use brushes that
Yeah.
simulate the look of like gouache or oil paint. And I've looked at work where sometimes where I was like, oh, is this a digital painting? And like it turns out that's like 200 years old and it's like
Oh
in oil.
wow.
And I was like, oh, okay. So I think it's easy to be confused these days. Like how, what's the medium here? Like how is this made? But um there's times when it's rather obvious that it was made digitally. So I like to combine both. And I am a little bit of a perfectionist, so I do like to have like those crisp, clean lines. Um, and actually, the reason why I started to make work that's more traditional was because then when the opportunity to make the murals came up, I had to like get back into acrylic painting, and I had just been doing digital painting before then, and so like I like found a reason then to like get back into traditional mediums. But I did a lot of drawings. Traditionally, when I on that project, I shared it with the client. I made them traditionally, and then when I would iterate on it, I would do it digitally. So like that really helps with the process, because if I just use tracing paper to like make changes, that would take a long time. And it's also really easy to make color sketches for a client before you finalize on what the color scheme will look like.
See, that's actually a good again. That's actually a good consideration because the idea of time in terms of creating digital and traditional work, because obviously traditional work will take a lot longer, most likely take a lot longer, not always, but most likely take a lot longer. And then, digital sometimes a lot quicker. And like, have you found that it's worth the sacrifice of time to create something digitally than it is traditionally?
When you make work traditionally, I think you think a little bit differently when you're holding a pencil. I think the tool really affects the way that you're, or, the way you're experiencing reality. And um, I feel like I think that we're working with clients. You really feel like you have to. Like I feel an immense amount of pressure to work digitally, because I know how easy it will be to make changes. Um, but at the same time, if you work traditionally, you have to be conscious of what you're doing, and you respond to color a little bit differently too. When I'm painting, like with gouache, I'm like very aware of what color can, like the value of color, the lightness or darkness, or like the contrast, as I'm doing it, because I know that that it will be difficult to change it later. So I try to be aware more. I think I'm more conscious of like, okay, this is it. Like, let me just really be in the moment. And if you make work digitally, you can kind of like change, you can fix it up later, you can change it around. And so there's less of like, of an intensity when you're working that way.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess it's like when you take a photograph and it's like you're just going to edit it later, so you don't really worry about the imperfections as much. Whereas if we're shooting on film, for instance, because you can't edit it later in the same way, you'd make sure it's lined up perfectly. That's something I should totally do. But yeah, that's you're lined up perfectly and you'll take the shot because you know that you can't change it in the same way later. But do you think that working traditionally makes your work more unique?
Mm, it's really interesting to think about the traditional tools and uh, um, and its uniqueness, because when you work with a certain medium, if you look at a lot of work, you can see, oh, like it reminds you of like artwork that comes from a different era, a different time, like, like even like 100 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And when you work with digital tools, like you don't really have that feeling.
Yeah.
So, because it cannot possibly look like that. Like, you make something in a 3D modeling software, Cinema 4D, like it's obvious that it's been made in our current time. And like it was really hard to achieve that plastic. It's hard to achieve the plasticky look, like if you're working with oil paints. And I'm sure that if artists from the 17th century looked at that, they would just be blown away, like the hyper realists back then.
Like that's the mimicry of like. Why do you think so? Why do you think that if we have traditional art, if we have digital art, why do you think that people, you know, are interested in say mimicking traditional aesthetics by using digital? Like, why would they not just want to have kind of their own kind of aesthetics, a kind of own digital aesthetic?
I think it's well, one of them is to create a certain feeling, like a mood, right? And um, there's so much that you can choose from now. I think it's just a different mode of expression. I mean, obviously, work that you make now, I think it's very unique to our age, even if it's made with traditional tools. I still think it, our mindset's completely different, and um, we just I think that it's just really enjoyable. For example, like I love watercolor, and I just don't get that. Like I know that I can make something that looks like it was made with watercolor digitally, but when I do it in person, it's like it's a great experience. It's very, and art has different functions too. It can be like therapeutic,
Yeah.
and we don't really have to make art that serves a purpose besides um, just expressing that. So sometimes, like the medium you can make great work with it and experience it in that way.
Yeah, that's a good consideration. That's a really good point. No, that's a really good point. And I think it's sometimes hard to forget, and that's definitely something we'll get into later. It's definitely hard to forget that there are different kind of purposes for art. Like it doesn't have to be just about aesthetics, or just have to be about money, or just have to be about it can be personal. You can just create work just for yourself and never share it with anybody. So I think that's a really good point, and that's definitely something we're going to touch upon later because I'm pretty sure it's in one of my questions. If it's not, it will be. So in terms of digital work, so what is your opinion on the rise and popularity of digital art in, say, like the recent, even like 5 or so years? What is your opinion on that? Do you think it's a good thing?
Can you be a little more specific about the digital art that you're thinking of?
I've been asking about digital art in general, and in terms of the way that obviously the world is seeing a shift into kind of more technologically advancement, and the digital art being like, say, digital art using for campaigns, and digital art being used for websites, and digital art being used, graphics on advertisements. And do you think that, okay, I guess the best easiest way to ask the question, or another way to ask the question would be, do you think that we'll get to a point where digital art will replace the traditional?
Um, I definitely don't think so. I think that people keep using traditional work and use it in different ways that are really interesting and compelling. But I think that there are a lot of illustrators that work at companies that, like, if you go to Google, right, and you use an app, like there are lots of illustrations for different parts of it, and it's just like it just renders better because it was made digitally, and like it's easy to make changes to, and for people who are working in-house, like, and have to make changes all the time, it's unavoidable. Like it would be very hard to work at that in that kind of fast-paced environment if you're just using traditional medium. um, and yeah, it's interesting how etching and pen and ink used to be the favored medium for commercial work because that was easily reproducible. And now it seems that, oh, it's like vector-based work. It's like favored medium for commercial work.
And actually, you raised a really good point, because I guess one of the banes of a lot of artists who work traditionally is that it's hard to photograph their work, or it's hard to kind of capture the essence of their work within an image, a copied image, because obviously their work is a physical object. Whereas if you're creating work that's digital, because it's already digitally based, it's going to be more fluid. The transition from idea to screen and to resolution size and just kind of RI is going to be way more fluid. And actually, that's not something I've ever thought about. And now that I'm thinking about that, that makes a lot of sense for a lot of artists I talk to who say, it's hard to photograph their work because nobody tells you how to photograph your work well if you're creating traditional media. And, as a photographer, I'm well aware that you, for the most part, you don't just point and shoot a camera and it's done for you. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into the lighting and making sure things look great and it's in focus. So that's actually a really good point and really good consideration that I've never thought about actually until you've mentioned that. So thank you very much. That's cool. I've learned something interesting today. But that's really interesting. And that makes me kind of think about, like, that would make sense because it would save you a lot of time and hassle in the long run, particularly if you are, as you said, creating in fast-paced environments or have to create a lot of work in a short amount of time, or if you have a lot of clients you need to create work for. It just makes sense.
Mhm.
But do you have a preference between traditional or digital art?
I like both. So I maybe it's seasonal, or not, but recently during COVID, I used to have an old laptop, and it was kind of it would shut down sporadically, so I knew it was time to upgrade it.
It's never fun. It's never fun.
So I got a desktop, and now I feel now that I have that set up, it's a lot easier for me to work digitally because I can just put my Wacom tablet there. And so I think that having, a space that's set up for the work, um, that can make it more appealing because um, when I'm working with watercolor, there's a lot of cleanup involved, and yeah, I mean, it can be fun, but it can be a little bit tedious. When I was working on the murals, I had to throw away the paint after I would use it because you're not allowed to wash it down the drain pipe because it flows out into the bay. And it was kind of hard, but I had to wash the brushes. And so that was kind of hard because,
Yeah.
I know that the plastic is going into the ocean, but so I prefer not to use acrylics because I don't want to contribute to more plastic waste. I feel a little bit better with watercolors, but I feel since I'm using the computer for other things already, I feel I feel fine about using it to create digital artwork. I don't have any sense of guilt.
Oh no, absolutely. I don't think you should, but I think it's interesting that you're aware of that though. Like you're conscious that actually, yes, I could create this traditionally, but actually is the time I'm going to take to create the work going to be taken away by the process of creating the work, as opposed to just being able to do it digitally and actually just creating the work and spending the time focused on the actual making of the work, which which is a really good point. I keep saying that today. That's not even funny, but that's fine because you raised such good points. It's not my fault; it's your fault. So it's all good. It's a good point. Like I said, it's a good point. I can hear myself saying it in my mind. I'm like, Aaron, be quiet, and it's not happening. So it's all good. So talking about digital art, actually, let's talk about your line stickers because I was actually really, really intrigued by these. These are super interesting, and I read the little description about them personally, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. But can you talk a bit about them and kind of the idea behind them?
Yeah. So I put some peanuts out in my backyard one day, and I was really excited when the wildlife came and took it, and it was gone the next day. And so I was really motivated to put out more. And the next day, I just spread peanuts over the entire yard. And a bunch of birds came, different wildlife. They're fighting with each other for it, and the crows were really attuned to me and to the door, and they were shitting on the door, and they they knew, they were angry that I wouldn't come out and feed them more. I don't know. I started to create this fantasy in my head that they have all this intuition and this knowledge, and that they can communicate to me. And yeah, so my mom is Japanese, and my mom's side of the family lives in Japan, and they don't all speak English very well, or at all even. So I wanted to create stickers, and people use Line the most in Japan as a messaging platform, and I just wanted to create stickers that can communicate a feeling without having to use words, and share that with some of my family. And so, I yeah, I think that it was very nice to be able to do that.
See, I think that's really sweet because that's like something really personal that you wanted to create. Yeah, actually, it was nice because you made it public as well. And I think that's actually really nice. I didn't know that you made it like quite so personally, and I think that makes it even better. I think that makes it that's like really sweet, and that's actually really nice though how you kind of you've solved an own problem for yourself. Yeah, you're also going to help other people because then other people will be able to use these stickers and be like, okay, this is cool, and kind of get a sense of communication. And it's also really nice because you're very on the pulse, with current times because obviously emojis and stickers are like hugely popular. You know, half the time we have conversations with people without using words. So I think that's like you're really ahead of well, you're probably on the pulse, I'd say. You're probably ahead of the game actually, but you're probably like ahead of the game because you're very in tune to both the analog side and both the digital side, and you know how to use one in one sense and one in another. I think that's really clever, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's an example where maybe making that work in a more traditional medium wouldn't work too well translated to digital because um, it just I made them digitally, but I like to paint it a little bit, and I think that it looks better on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're great. I think that's absolutely awesome, and I really just like this idea of creating something that's so contemporary that people will use. Because you could have created anything and be like, oh, here you go, here's this. I don't know. You could have just created something and be like, here you go, here's it for you, it's for free. You can take it, or even not for free, but this is what I created for you, and then people just not need to want to use it or have any need for it. But because you create something that's very specific for a very specific purpose, yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think that's clever, I'd say. And I enjoyed them. I think they're really great. I think they're fun. That's exactly what I imagine you intended them to be. So yeah, I thought they're really cool. They're very cool. And have you got any plans to do any more?
Well, I was thinking about making animated stickers in the future. I
Oh,
don't know what they'll be of, but I think it'll be fun to like add a little bit of movement.
yes, that's such a good idea. That's such a good idea. Yeah, absolutely. Let me know when you do that. I'm super interested to see that because that's a great idea.
Oh,
And I think that's actually okay. So let's take this kind of slightly back then, actually, or like more kind of full circle. So you said about animation, and obviously you used to do animation. So do you actually do animation now within your work, or is that something that you don't do?
when I would make animation, it was more, I don't do it right now.
Hmm.
I just make 2D images, and I think it adds a whole nother dimension. It can be very subtle though. I like with the stickers, like, I was thinking of very, very subtle animations that don't require a whole lot. But the kind of animation that I did before was really to make it look snappy.
Okay.
Um, like I will just divulge. I've tried to avoid talking about like my first career, but I did work at MTV for a while, for 8 months, and I worked on different websites for them, and they have a certain aesthetic. They have
Yeah,
a branding style. It has to be like quick and like flashy,
of
right?
course.
And so that was the kind of animation that I was
Okay.
making. And yeah.
So would you consider creating other kind of animations now? So say maybe creating I'm trying to think of a good example. So creating like a moving comic strip, for instance, or I'm trying to think of any kind of interesting examples I can think of off the top of my head, and I can't think of any. Or even like cinemagraphs where you have an image but part of it moves.
hmm yeah, I mean, potentially for the stickers in a very small context. You know, I think that that's something that I might do, but I think that there could be a feeling of it being gimmicky. I think that's the dangerous part of it, of doing that sort of thing. Because like, I will be really conscious of like what is there to gain from adding animation to it, you know,
True. That's very true.
and, and like what's the context? Because if it's a sticker, like if you're using messages or WhatsApp or I don't know, and like their animations that are stickers, they're a lot more compelling than static images. But outside of that context, I don't know when I would use it.
Oh, that's good. But that's interesting. 'Cause that makes me think that you're very conscious of the audience and who's going to see it. as opposed to just creating it and being like, let's put it out there and somebody will see it. You're being like, okay, so how are people going to react to this before you've even created it? Or like you'd kind of probably assess it in your own terms of like, if I saw this, would I stop and actually want to look at it? Or would I be compelled by it? Or would I be interested? And I think that's really intriguing, actually. And I really like the fact that you said that and that you actually kind of was a bit like, maybe, rather than just like, yeah, sure, it's great. You actually kind of, yeah, I like that. I think that's really awesome. I think that's really cool. Yeah. It kind of just shows, actually, that's really cool for me, because that just kind of shows like, if I were to hire you, your kind of thought process, you're not just going to be like, yeah, okay, let's just do this first idea you say. You're going to be like, okay, let me go back and think about this. So that tells me, just from that small thing you said, that you're very kind of evaluative. I don't know if that's a word, but like, you like to evaluate things, and you'll think about like kind of the brief thoroughly, as opposed to just being like, yeah, okay, this is cool, this is a nice idea. You'll be like, okay, actually, so would I be interested in it? And if you wouldn't be interested in it, why wouldn't you be interested in it? And then how would you make it interesting to yourself for them other people to be interested? So I think that says a lot about you as a person as well as an artist.
Yeah, and I think that it's also an opportunity to really think about the problem, and if it required more animation than what I usually do, like maybe that's an opportunity to collaborate with someone who's an animator, right? Because I think it's important to define the scope before working on something like that, because it could be much more than what you have in mind. So if you define the problem up front, like then that gives you more time to discuss that, if that's a possibility with the client, and if it's not, then we would just like move forward in a different direction.
I feel like you're the kind of person I'd totally love to hire to create something for me, even though I have nothing to hire you for. But you're the kind of person I'd totally love to hire, because I'd just be so interested. I'm just really interested in the way you think about things. So, what is your favorite piece of work you've created, and why?
My favorite work, I think it would be the mural at 26 Valencia, because I know that the children that are there are going to be experiencing it. That's a tutoring center, so
Oh wow,
the
okay.
mural's
Oh wow, that's
a
amazing.
tutoring space, and so the tables are in the center and the mural's off to the side. And yeah, I've gotten a lot of great feedback about it. So I'm really happy that it's there, and I like the fact that you can see it from the street. And so it's accessible to the public. You can walk in and take a look. And it's also protected from the elements because it's indoors.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's this feeling of permanence that it'll be around for a while. So that makes me quite happy.
And actually, could you quickly describe what that mural is if people haven't seen it?
Sure. So the theme is of an enchanted forest. So the architect designs the space with that theme. And in the space, there are different elements. Like they created what looks like the skeleton of. It's an abstract version of a skeleton of the body of a whale, like maybe the ribs or something. So you walk through that in the entrance, and they brought in different artists to add to different elements of the space. So I created the mural part, but like there was another artist who created a cave that you crawl into.
Oh, wow.
And there are little dioramas within it. And the mural that I created is of this forest space that has like different buildings embedded within the trees, and there are creatures that wander around, little fairies, and there are some unicorns that are like hanging around, and there's a lot of fog because San Francisco is foggy, so they have to like roll over into the painting itself. And yeah, so it's like it's a fairy forest scene.
I think it's very beautiful. It's very beautiful, and it's very compelling. Like I saw it and I was like, this is really interesting. And how did you get into doing murals in the first place?
Well, I never anticipated that, but I have a friend who's an architect, and so she worked at this architecture firm, and she brought me in, and then I met the head architect, and then got involved with the whole process. But I think she had seen some work that I was posting on Instagram. Maybe I think I was like posting some digital sketches. So I guess we were friends first, but I guess you could say that Instagram helped to like sparked that dialogue.
That concludes the first part of my interview with Jacqueline Sarah Brown. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions or comments about it, please send me an email via theflyingfruitbowl@gmail.com or via social media sites such as Instagram. The Flying Fruit Bowl audio interviews can now be found on a variety of sites such as YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Player FM, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to support the platform, please consider subscribing, sharing, rating, or reviewing. Also, please don't forget to check out www.theflyingfruitbowl.co.uk for daily art inspiration. And if you're a creative, please get in touch for a chance to be featured or interviewed. Once again, thank you very much for listening. And until next week, please stay safe.